today's topic you see it on the board, nonprofit organizations in the U.S. And our presenter today is Samantha Salvatori.
Good morning. As Shinya said, my name is Samantha Salvatori. You can call me Samantha. I am a Fulbright ETA like Taylor, who prior to being an English teacher here in Kyrgyzstan, worked for many years for nonprofit organizations in the US. So knowing nonprofits are an interest to you, maybe at least a little related to your major, I've been asked to speak a little bit about my experience. So I have a short presentation, and then I would just like to hear from you, what questions you have, your thoughts, interests, what you're doing here. So we'll go through this, but be thinking of any questions you have that you'd like from me. So a little bit more about my professional background, my personal background. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, so if you can picture a map of the United States, Nebraska is like exactly in the center of the country. So that's where I'm from, that's where all of my professional work experience is. Like I said, I'm one of the Fulbright English teaching assistants here in Bishkek. I teach at Polytech, down the street, way down the street, but down the street. I teach primarily English classes to first and second year students who are information technology majors, and I also teach academic writing to both my students as well as our professors. I studied in university. My degree name is called Multidisciplinary Studies, which is a very fancy word you've probably never heard of before, but it means I just studied rather than one thing, like most of you study in one faculty, I got to study three. So the three things I studied were political science, public administration, just like government, nonprofit work, journalism, and then I had a minor that was specifically in nonprofit management. So not only have I worked professionally in the nonprofit NGO sphere, I also did take quite a few classes in my degree that focused on the academic study of how nonprofits function, how they're administered, specific skills that are important in nonprofit work, which I will talk about a little bit more. I have worked professionally in my full-time work for nearly 5 years in a variety of nonprofits, at least 4 different jobs. I have also volunteered for almost 10 years, volunteering with nonprofits, at least in the US. Being a volunteer hours is really vital to successful nonprofits. And I think you had a presentation on that if any of you were there sometime through this series. So it's really important for nonprofits. So even though it was time I was giving for free to the mission, to the organizations I cared about, I still include it in my professional experience because it's really informed the work that I do. So general overview of when I say nonprofit from an American standpoint, what does that mean? So in America, a nonprofit is an official legal status of an organization that makes no financial profit. So unlike a business where you make money and that might be paid out to shareholders or to the president of the company, a nonprofit, any revenue they make, anything that might be called a profit, has to go back into the organization. So no individual is making money in a nonprofit, and that is, there are laws and reporting in the US that make that really strict to be called a nonprofit. We call it, within our tax code, these are called public charities or 501c3s. So if you hear someone talk about a public charity in the US or a 501c3 in a US context, this just means what your standard belief of a nonprofit is. There There are other ones within the law, 501c4s, 501c5s. Those are other types of organizations that don't make a profit, but they're not considered kind of a public good charity. So, according to the National Center for Charitable Statistics, which is a research organization in the U.S., there are more than 1.5 million nonprofit organizations registered in America. So 1.5 million, that's a lot. That's a lot of organizations. And size of organizations vary. Some are like one staff member, some are really big and work across the country or globally. But just think there are at least 1.5 organizations or businesses doing some type of work in this nonprofit manner. A really important part of nonprofits, or I'll shorten them to NPOs, is that they are mission-based. So what this means is rather than the main goal of a nonprofit relates to its mission statement. And in America, every nonprofit has a mission statement, which is basically a sentence saying, what are we trying to do? How are we trying to make the world better? This is different from a public or a private company. At the end of the day, most private businesses, they are trying to make money. Okay? They're trying to make a profit. Nonprofits are mission-based, meaning that each individual nonprofit is working for something specific. So for example, I worked for one organization that helped refugees and immigrants. So our mission was to help refugees and immigrants integrate into their community. So all of the work we did, all of the money we spent, we always were thinking about justifying, going back to what we are doing focused on our mission. And even though we talk about money a lot in nonprofits, well-functioning nonprofits should be connected back to mission. And that can vary. There are lots of sectors. Like I said, one I worked for was refugees and immigrants. I also worked for an animal welfare organization where our mission was to provide animals good homes and provide them health care. So there's no right or wrong mission for nonprofits. Every one of these 1.5 million organizations gets to write their own, but at the end of the day, that's what they're working towards. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, since you have interest or may have interest working for NPOs, or NGOs, which are non-governmental organizations, which are kind of international nonprofits, basically professionally, some of the skills and talents that you need or that are helpful in these. So I'll put them all up here. Things like organization, communication skills, reading, writing, public speaking, teamwork, fundraising. I'll talk about that more because fundraising is really important. Any language skills you have, cultural adaptation, flexibility. These things there are of course more of them, like in any job, but these are some of the, I think, most important things you have, particularly in nonprofit work. Compared to corporate work, private businesses, nonprofits usually have less money, they're smaller, they have smaller teams, so you have to work a lot more collaboratively, doing a lot more work. And you're doing really important work, right, because you are mission-based. So having these skills, like being able to work across languages or cultures, is really an asset in any type of nonprofit or NGO work that you do. A lot of nonprofit work is things like public speaking and fundraising. Because when we care about something, when you believe in the mission of your nonprofit, you believe it's important work that you do, you want other people to know and care about the work that you're doing. So being able to say, I work for this great organization that helps animals, right? If you work for an animal nonprofit, you want to be able to communicate that, to write social media posts or write letters to people saying, I really care about this, I want you to care about it too. So having these communication skills is really important. And then fundraising goes with that. Because nonprofits don't make a profit, they have to get money somehow. So getting private donations is really important for nonprofits in the US. And there's professionals whose entire job is to people for money for nonprofits. And learning how to ask people for money and being comfortable asking people for money is a special skill that it takes time to learn. I worked in fundraising for a fundraising team for a little while, and it was not what I expected it to be. It's very different than you think it is, but learning how to think about that and do it is really important for nonprofit work. Types of jobs at NPOs. So even though my experience tends to fall in communications and fundraising, there's lots of different things you can do depending on the skills you have. So some of the most important ones are service delivery, which is doing the groundwork of whatever the nonprofit is doing. So to go back to the example of when I worked for the Humane Society that took care of animals, the majority of our staff, we had 300 workers, about 250 of them were service delivery, meaning they were the ones helping the animals, right? Feeding them, giving them shots, helping people adopt them. So service delivery, even if you don't like the strategic part of nonprofits, if you don't have interest in fundraising or communications or management, if you're just interested in helping the mission of a nonprofit, there's tons of service delivery jobs in NPOs or NGOs that you're able to do based on what your skills are, what you like. Program management, this is just kind of being the boss of the service delivery people. So a lot of people do field work or service work in nonprofits for maybe 5 or 10 years, and then they want to go into management. So then they run management. Fundraising, communications, and volunteer management. I am biased because I worked in these fields, but they are really, really vital to nonprofit work in the US. Volunteering, fundraising, and then communicating your mission and message. So it's a whole professional job that you can have to work in nonprofit marketing or nonprofit fundraising and nonprofit volunteer management. I have another slide here where I'll talk about the number of volunteers in nonprofits and why they're so important. But there are hundreds of thousands of people in America who volunteer for a nonprofit every year. So having someone who knows how to build relationships with volunteers, ensure they're doing good work and they're being effective for the organizations is a whole job that you can do. And I know people who are volunteer managers who absolutely love it. And then, of course, at the bottom, we can't forget finance and administration. Nonprofits, like businesses, have presidents and vice presidents and human resources departments that have to hire staff and ensure that we are filing taxes and paying people their salaries. So there are lots of people who are accountants and people with finance degrees who work for nonprofits too, because maybe their skills lie more in administration or traditional business skills, but they really want to do more good work. So they take those business skills and do them for the business of mission-based nonprofits. So whatever your interests or whatever your skills are, if you're drawn to mission-based work, to nonprofit work, there's a job somewhere that will work for you. So to give you a little bit more details about kind of my experience, I've worked in several different positions in several different sectors. So one of my titles was Economic Development Program Coordinator, which was a little bit program management, a little bit service delivery. When I did this job, I ran a financial literacy program for new immigrants to the US. It was a grant-based program. So our total budget was just under $1 million from the federal government, and I was the very first person to have that job, so I had to build the program using all my management and creativity skills, and then run the program and actually help my clients. I did some fundraising jobs. I was a donor services administrator. The titles here don't really matter. I think really just focusing on kind of the sector of different types of work you can do. Fundraising, I was a communication specialist where I specifically did marketing and communications. There's a really growing field, particularly in the US, of using social media to fundraise and to connect people with the mission of nonprofits. So I know at least my students that I talk to, a lot of them really want to be like S&M specialists or love social media and want to know if they can do that as a job. You can for nonprofits as well. So it's totally possible. I did that. I also did something that was teaching. Most of my volunteer experience, which I did for almost 10 years, a lot of it was as an ESL teacher and tutor on a volunteer basis. I did more marketing work, and then there's also, these are some pictures of me, because nonprofits are so big in the US, it is a whole it's this third industry. In the US, we talk about there is like the corporate world, like private businesses, there's government, and then now there's nonprofits. So those are kind of the three spheres people work in. And because the sphere is so big, we now have like professional organizations that you can join where you get additional training, education, networking, things like that. So I'm part of a Young Nonprofits professional networking group that helps me meet people and learn how to be a better nonprofit professional. So I think this is the last slide. I've mentioned that volunteering for nonprofits is really, really essential for nonprofits in the US. And this is because the money that nonprofits have is usually pretty low compared to businesses. Their staff, we have much fewer staff. So having people who care about the work the nonprofit is doing and volunteer their time, give their time for free to also help do the work, really helps NPOs do more work than they would be able to do otherwise. So an estimated 21.5% of US adults volunteered in 2017, this is according to that same organization I cited earlier, NCCS, contributing an estimated 8.8 billion hours of time. So that number is really high to think about. 8.8 billion hours of time was donated, free time, free work, was donated to nonprofit organizations. So that really helps nonprofits, at least in the US, has really helped them thrive and grow and has helped them be effective. It's because a quarter, right? America has over 300 million people, and a quarter of them work with a nonprofit. So it's really ingrained, I think, a part of American culture and society to not only do your own work, but to give back and volunteer free time. So the monetary value, when we work in nonprofits, we like to put a number on everything. So these 8.8 billion hours, the nonprofits I worked for, we estimated that 1 hour of volunteer time equated to about $23.50, $23 to $24 of time from our budget that we were saving. We didn't have to spend that. So all of these hours donated across the US from this number equate to almost $200 billion that nonprofits saved. $200 billion, that would be a huge private company that nonprofits were able to do just because of other people, private people caring about them and doing that work. So that's kind of my little short presentation, giving a short overview of what nonprofit work is, the work that I have done. I'm going to keep it short because I wanted to hear from you, any questions you have, any comments.
How many hours did you work, like, for a year? How many hours did you spend for a nonprofit work?
Yes, so most of it, before I came to Kurdistan, the 4 years before that, I worked full-time as a nonprofit salary, so 40 hours a week in the US. When I was volunteering, I usually volunteered anywhere between 5 to 10 hours a week. So depending on my free time, what I was doing when I was a student, I was very busy, so I was volunteering a little bit less. But usually, yeah, full-time in the US is 40 hours, and then volunteers really flexible. I know people who work another job 40 hours a week and volunteer like 1 hour a week. And I know people who volunteer like 30 hours a week if they have a lot of free time. I was mostly, because I was a full-time employee, most of my time was spent in nonprofits.
And what's the total summary of hours in a year?
Oh, in a year?
Yes.
Oh, I'd have to do that math. I don't know.
You
Let's
can
see.
multiply
Your-
10 hours.
Let's see. If I was doing, let's do that math. If I worked 3 hours a week plus maybe 10 volunteer hours, that's total, let's say, do the math. I was not a math major. Okay, so 40 hours full time, right? Plus 10 hours volunteer is about 50 times 52. We're doing a whole year, estimating 52 weeks in a year. That's like 2,600 hours,
Wow.
give or take. Yeah. So sometimes it was less than that, right? But to give an estimate, yeah, it's about how much time?
My maximum was about 500
Okay.
hours. Yeah.
Which would be about right if you were just like volunteering or working part-time, right? It's 10 times 52 would be about 500. But because my whole job was to be in nonprofits, so I had to, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. What kind of work did you do for?
I was a member of Enactus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think you know.
I feel like I've heard of it. I don't know what work they do. But
It has like affiliates, something like that, in the 37 countries
Okay.
around the world.
yeah.
And in the USA, there are a lot of it too.
Okay. Excellent. Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy the
Yes,
work you
I
did?
enjoyed it, but I worked there for 1 or more year.
Okay.
When the studying was online,
Okay,
it was
yeah.
easier.
Yeah. We all had a little bit more time when we didn't have to travel to school and work every day and all that. Yeah.
Can you name 5 organizations that you work
Yes. So I mostly worked for organizations that were local to my city and my state. So I worked for one that was called In Common Community Development, which was where I did my ESL teaching. It was a small community center. I worked for the Nebraska Humane Society, which was my statewide animal organization. I worked for Youth and Family Services in Nebraska, which was where I did most of my immigration and refugee work. I worked for something called Do Space, which was a library. It was a technology library. And I worked for International Council for Refugees and Immigrants, which was another refugee and immigrant organization. So those are all, most of my experiences in smaller nonprofits that worked in my city and my state, but there are also nonprofits that work across the US and across the globe that are much bigger. But yeah.
What NPO or a non-profit organization can you recommend to us where you can work?
Oh, that's hard. My advice is to choose an NPO that you feel connected to the mission. And I can't tell you what to care about. It might be, I care about refugees. Most of my work has been refugee work. I care about education and literacy, so I've done that. But I know people, I did love my job when I worked at the Humane Society because I like animals, but I didn't feel really passionate about animals. So it was just kind of a job. So in the work I've done for nonprofits and the work that of many of my colleagues, you'll be happiest working for NPOs if you work for an organization that has a mission that you're really passionate about. So maybe that's green economy, maybe that's helping the environment. So something like, I'm trying to think of it, like an international one, you might know, like Greenpeace is a big environmental one, right? If you're passionate about the environment, find a job in an environmental nonprofit. If you're passionate about education, find one that's related to education. But you'll be a lot happier in nonprofit work doing work that you feel connected to rather than just like taking a job because it's in a nonprofit.
Okay, thank you.
organizations in Kyrgyzstan going to work like that?
I am sadly and shamefully not that informed about NPOs and NGOs in Kyrgyzstan as I should be. So, other than kind of more the government side, like UNESCO and UNDP, more the government or NGO side, I don't know that many of your local organizations. So what I guess that's a question for you. What local Kyrgyz organizations, NPOs, should I know about? Do you know any? Do you work with any here that I should know?
As I
about?
said earlier,
Yeah, Enactus. Yeah, of course.
We have lots that try to help homeless animals.
Okay, yes.
They're usually named like Caring Hands or whatever.
Yeah.
And most of them collaborate with Turkish
Okay.
university because they provide money for medical services for the animals. And they have online groups, like Facebook groups, communities, like
Yeah.
let's say.
Yeah.
Could you tell us the most difficult moments, most difficult period of your volunteering, or for what kind of difficulties should we be prepared?
Yes, so depends on the type of work you do. It was really difficult when I worked for the Humane Society, who were helping homeless animals. And even though I worked in fundraising, we still worked a lot with the animals because we were learning their stories so we could tell donors about them. So it was always really difficult when we had to, an animal was very sick or was dying and we had to like euthanize that animal, put it down. That was very difficult emotionally to do. The most professionally difficult, that really challenged my skills was, I worked for one organization that was using money in a way that I did not feel was ethical or legal, and I had to kind of go through a conflict resolution process of like reporting the people who were stealing money from the organization to our board, and that was very challenging. Unfortunately, sometimes in nonprofits and in business, right, in corporate, this is not just nonprofit, people misuse money. There's embezzlement, there's misuse of funds, there's lying about how money is being used. And I did see one of the organizations I worked for using money in a way they shouldn't have been. So I had to deal with that, and that was very challenging professionally. I hope you never have to do that. I hope all of the organizations you ever work for are good and excellent and don't misuse money, but unfortunately it does sometimes
I
happen.
hope too.
Yeah.
In this kind of job, you always like get depressed or exhausted of these things, and how you deal with it.
Yeah. Oh, that's hard. Yeah. We talk about something we talk about a lot, particularly is burnout, particularly in nonprofits. And this happens a lot because we're doing difficult work. You work a lot. You work with not very much staff, not very much money. And you're trying to do work that's really important and you care about. So and you don't make your salary in nonprofit is going to be much lower than it would be doing a similar job for a private business. So burnout happens. The thing that's always helped me, I think it's just that I was also never doing the most difficult jobs emotionally. I know people when I worked with refugees who were helping refugees who were first coming to America get their first apartment, get their kids in school. They worked their job maybe no more than 6 months or a year because it was so emotionally difficult. And that's just kind of the reality of the nonprofit world. Most of my work in nonprofits was a little bit not further back from that service delivery, which helped me avoid burnout a little bit because I wasn't constantly hearing about the trauma of clients who are struggling with that. It's also really helped me to have really strong relationships with my colleagues and other friends who work in nonprofits because there's mutual understanding there, right? Our jobs are hard, we don't get paid enough, but we really care about them. So having people that I can talk to in my professional circle and even some of my best friends also work in nonprofits who understand the unique challenges of nonprofit work has helped me continue to want to work in nonprofits. Yeah, there's a question.
What new things have you found in volunteering?
Say again, sorry.
What new things have you found in volunteering?
Yeah.
Did you find or do you find in volunteering?
Fine.
New things for you, yeah.
That's good. Yeah. What I like about volunteering, that I like more about volunteering than even working in a nonprofit, is working full time, right, as a salaried nonprofit employee. It is work, right? I'll sometimes, like any job, I'll sometimes have to do work I don't like to do, but it's my job, so I have to. Whereas volunteering, because it's all by choice, right? No one's paying me, I'm not paying anyone, I don't really have a boss, I'm just there because I want to be. I almost always, I can't think of a single time I've left like a volunteer shift and not felt really fulfilled and like felt really happy, because volunteering, because it's all by choice, because it's all free donated time, I'm choosing to do it. And if I don't want to do it anymore, I can choose not to. So that's why sometimes I like volunteering even more, because it's always going to be fulfilling and it's less like commitment than taking a job where then I do have to show up no matter what 40 hours a week and my boss will always ask me for things like that. So yeah.
What's your favorite organization where you work?
My favorite. Ooh. It's hard. I've liked all my jobs for different reasons and all my organizations. Most recently, I worked for, the name of the organization was International Council for Refugees and Immigrants, but it's a smaller, newer organization in my state that helps refugee youth primarily. And I've done some work for them helping build their fundraising, their curriculum, their after-school curriculum. And I personally just really care about refugees. That's just an issue that I'm passionate about. So working for that organization that I trust, that I know the people who work there, that I believe in, I've really enjoyed. Yeah.
Your feelings about our country before and after visit?
After. So before I came, I didn't know, I knew about Kyrgyzstan like a very broad understanding, very broad strokes. I knew where I could point to on the map, right? I knew the kind of generally about Central Asia. I knew what languages you spoke. I had taken a class in university that studied like the development, the history of Central Asia broadly. So I felt like I knew. I'm like, I know, like I chose to come to Kyrgyzstan based on those little bits that I knew. But now that I've been here, I have a much deeper understanding, right, of who the Kyrgyz people are, how you're different maybe from other Central Asian countries more broadly. I feel very lucky to have come to Kyrgyzstan, and I feel like I made the right choice in choosing Kyrgyzstan because the people have been very kind, everyone's been very welcoming. I've had great students. Taylor and I a few weeks ago were just at a conference with other Fulbrights from all the other Central Asian countries, and compared to hearing what some of their challenges in other countries, I feel like Kyrgyzstan has just been very easy to work in. Everyone's been welcoming, very few challenges. So I'm very grateful to be here.
So in the future, maybe do you want to open or have your own non-profit organization, and what kind of, and where?
Yes. So personally, I don't want to open my own nonprofit. Not because I don't have work that I want to do or things that I care about, but being in the nonprofit world, we usually call them executive directors rather than presidents or CEOs. Being the executive director of a nonprofit organization is a ton of work, and I've seen it. In all the organizations I work for, the EDs, they have so much work, so much responsibility, both in that people start nonprofits. I have an old boss that just started his own nonprofit because he really cared about the work that he was doing and wanted to do it. But now that he's the ED, he's caught up in figuring out taxes and people's salaries and raising money and all of these like management administrative things that is very, very stressful. And what I love about nonprofit work is that mission-based work, and I like to be more involved in the day-to-day fulfillment of the mission. So I don't know that I would ever want to willingly take on like all of the legal and financial challenges of being the head of my own nonprofit. But if I did, if say we'll imagine being the executive director of a nonprofit is easier, or I decide it's worth it, I would probably start a nonprofit focused on education. In everything I've done, one of my core values personally, which I now have, because nonprofits, along with mission, always have core values. I really care a lot about education, curiosity, helping people learn and achieve and develop as individuals. So I would probably focus on some type of community education initiative.
You mentioned the person who was dealing with taxes. Are all NPOs tax exempt?
Yes.
All tax exempt statements?
So this is, yes, NPOs don't pay taxes, but they still have to file income statements. So you have to, yes, so I'm kind of nerdy, but you can look up for every nonprofit, because they're public charities, there's something called an IRS Form 990, which is like the tax, we call it a tax form. They are tax exempt, but for any, at least US-based nonprofit, you can go pull this form, and it says what their total budget was, how much money they spent, their highest paid employees, usually where their money came from, how they spent it, how much they spent on program services versus fundraising versus office supplies. So yeah, even though nonprofits don't pay taxes, they still have to do a lot of kind of accounting paperwork to show, they have to basically prove every year that they're not making a profit. So they still have to file tax forms, yeah.
And it's submitted annually.
Annually. Yeah. So me, this is a thing, when I want to know a new nonprofit that I'm working with, kind of what they are, I will go pull this form. It's called the 990, right? It's a nonprofit financial statement, so I can see how much their budget is, right? Are they a $24 million organization? Are they a $100 million organization? Are they a $1 million organization? How much money do they have? How are they spending that money? Why are they spending it? There's a lot of, if you're curious about nonprofits, these forms have a lot of information on them that I look at to see, get a lot of background information about organizations.
I have a question. What problems did you clearly notice here? What we need to work with if we want to create, for example, own movement, volunteering?
I don't want to claim to be an expert on what problems you have. I think if you want to create an organization or create a movement, fix a problem, right? You already have your mission, right? You know what you want, and you'll be the expert on figuring out how to change that. I can tell you how to write grants. I can tell you how to ask an individual for $1 million. But when it comes to choosing a mission, like saying what problems need to be fixed, you as an individual or as a community or as a country are going to know that better than any outsider.
But there is a lot of problem issues.
So yeah, I guess you tell me, that comes back to what problems do you think should be a priority?
I guess you already identified some problems yesterday, right? Do you have problems with them?
We have problems alien date problem, as I remember, and problem of trash. We have problems of
Public.
public toilets.
Okay.
Okay.
It's
And
more important.
there was more, but I don't really remember.
Yeah.
About homeless people,
Homeless animals, homeless people,
medical care,
medical care.
about gender issues, I guess, men and women.
Yes, and non-equality between men and women, and stealing women.
Oh, yeah.
Sexual harassment of women, and there's a lot of
There's always more problems to be fixed in the world. Yeah. There's a list of like, I think 15 like subcategories that nonprofits in the U.S. at least like categorize themselves under, and it's like gender issues, like immigration, arts and culture, and the environment, health, and so there are a lot of what I just heard you say, things like smog, health, homeless people, homeless animals, they fall under those same categories. So there's more problems I think to be fixed here and in the world, wherever you live, than I think we'll ever be able to fix. So yeah, when it comes to starting an NPO, whatever you care about, you can start one and work towards it, because and different people are going to care about different priorities. So I think all priorities are generally equal, right? Is the environment more pressing than sexual harassment or gender issues, more pressing than homeless people or major healthcare issues? I think fundamentally they're all equal, and like what's more important depends on what you care about and what you want to give your time or energy to.
it depends on your mentality.
Yes, absolutely.
What countries have you been in Central Asia?
I've been to, so far, just Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. I hope before I leave to make it to Uzbekistan, and maybe Tajikistan if we have time, but so far just Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan.
She wants to ask what's better?
What?
What's better, Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan?
Well, I'm loyal to Kyrgyzstan because I live here. I have just spent like 3 days in Kazakhstan. I've spent a little time in Almaty and then some hiking. So Kyrgyzstan is in my heart, so I'll be loyal to Kyrgyzstan.
Did you find difference between
Instagram подписаться. I see the news.
Yes, yeah.
Did you find difference between Kazakh and Kyrgyz people?
Well, I didn't see a major difference, like in the people. Like I said, I have spent, 7 months here in Kyrgyzstan and 1 weekend in Kazakhstan. So I spent not very much time. The major differences I've noticed is in Almaty, at least, there are more Western brands, right? I can hear like Western companies. There's KFC and Nathan's Hot Dogs. In Almaty, there's Starbucks that I'm used to. There's Burger King. There's McDonald's. There's all these other things. But I think, other than that, I feel, maybe this is wrong, in the 1 weekend I was in Almaty, I felt like I think Kyrgyz people look more distinct. Maybe I just think that because I've been here longer, but when I was looking at people, I'm like, they look different. Like Kazakh people look a little bit different than Kyrgyz people. I don't know if that's true. Maybe that was my brain playing tricks on me. But we were also, the weekend we were in Almaty, I was surprised. I was there with some friends. I was surprised by how many Kazakh people complimented us on speaking Russian. My Russian is very little and very bad, but I speak a little bit, like choo-choo, like very bad. Not nearly as good as Taylor. But when we were in Almaty, anytime even to order food we use Russian, everyone said, oh, your Russian is so good, thank you for speaking Russian. Whereas here in Bishkek, I never get that. They look frustrated when I try to learn.
I said you can't speak either
like only like a tiny little bit and not very well. So
Have you been in another region in Kyrgyzstan?
other regions. So far I've been in Bishkek and like around Shui region, and then to Karakol. We went to Karakol. I have not been to Issyk-Kul Lake yet. I'm excited to go now that it is warmer.
You should go.
Yes, everyone says. So I'm hoping to go in June. And then next week I am planning to go to Osh. So I have not been to Osh yet, but I'm going to see a colleague next week in Osh. So we are going, I will see Osh. We are going to go to maybe Jalalabad. Well, I'm kind of down in that part of the country. The walnut forest I think we're going to. So then I will see that part. Yeah.
I'm from Osh.
Okay.
Рекомендации где нужно.
Osh. It's not joke. It's not joke. Yeah. Seriously. Я не знаю.
Salamanto, yeah, we went to Salamanto, yes.
Which countries have you been and what favorite?
So I have only been in the United States, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. I have not lived abroad. My passport was, American passport has pages, they stamp. It was completely blank before I came to Kyrgyzstan. So, I mean, my home country will always be my home. So the United States I love. And then I will always, be loyal to Kyrgyzstan because I have spent so much time there.
When are you planning to come back to US? Or you are planning to stay here?
No, I go back in July. Yeah, so I'm here for a little less than 3 more months, and then our contract ends, so I have to go back to America. But I hope to come back and visit some time in the future. I don't know when, but I will move back to America in July.
The contract is ending yet.
Yes. We are here we came in September, we are here till July, so 10 months, 1 academic year.
And where are you planning to work in US?
I don't know yet. It's a question. I don't know. Someday I would maybe like to work for the government. So the American government is based in Washington, D.C., so I might move back there, but I don't go back for 3 more months, so I don't have a job when I go back there.
But where will you live? Where's your hometown?
Yeah, my hometown is in Nebraska, Omaha. Yeah. So my things, I have furniture, I have more clothes that I did not bring with me, are in Nebraska. That's where my family is, my best friends. So I will go back to Nebraska at least for a little while, but I don't know how long I will be there.
So you will move somewhere else.
Yeah, I think so, maybe. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
No question.
Okay, I just want to make sure, any last questions?
Thank you.
Wait, last question, тогда я хочу. I still keep in mind the phrase that you said about NGO stuff. And you said that it can be even one person in NGOs. Is it real that you can just represent an NPO? Just yourself? Just
Yeah.
one person?
Yeah.
And how it works? Don't you need any staff, any volunteers or people who can help?
Yeah, so often there are volunteers. There might be 1 paid staff and then volunteers. But sometimes it is, some very small organizations really just start as like 1 person who really cares a lot and is doing a lot of work. There are some, I know in my town there was like an organization that a woman started. She was really passionate about the environment and just was like picking up trash, like making sure like there was no littering and stuff. And she just started as just herself, and she incorporated as a nonprofit and just worked by herself for a while until eventually I think she got more volunteers and additional help. But yeah, really you can't start with just 1 person.
She established an NPO, but I think it's a complicated process. Why taking so much time for all the procedures
Yeah.
when you can just be a person
But there are some benefits to establishing officially. It is a lot of work, a lot of paperwork. You usually have to talk to an attorney, a lawyer, or an accountant to help fill out the paperwork. But I've not done it myself. I've not started a nonprofit, so I don't know why you would do it, but it is possible at least, yeah. I don't know that I would recommend it, starting it just by yourself with no extra help, because it is difficult and a lot of work, but not impossible. Anything's possible if you care enough, I guess. Yeah.
For instance, can I create an organization where my goal will be like no bananas anymore?